My name is Vorath-Sel, and I want to make one thing absolutely clear before I tell you this story. I am not a coward. I have served 18 standard rotations aboard the Gallen warship Unyielding Dusk. I have stood in the blast radius of a collapsing star field and did not flinch. I once ate a plate of Zergian paste on a dare, and I only cried twice. But what I witnessed on the third moon of Polaris 4th, I will carry with me until the last breath leaves my secondary lungs. It started, as most terrible things do, with a bad idea from someone who was not me. His name was Drak, and he was, without question, the most aggressively overconfident life form I had ever encountered in 3 galaxies of travel. Drak was a Velthari, 6 limbs, 2 rows of teeth, a personal history that included picking fights with creatures twice his size, and somehow surviving. This had given him what scientists on several worlds would clinically diagnose as a dangerous delusion. He believed nothing could stop him. We were stationed at the Polaris 4 trade outpost, a grimy, crowded little hub where 7 species came to argue about prices and occasionally stab each other over shipping contracts. The Unyielding Dusk had docked for resupply, and our commander, a very tired Gallen elder named Prex Mull, had given the crew 4 hours of free movement on the station. I was, for the record, planning to spend those 4 hours eating something that was not ration paste and staring at the ceiling of a quiet booth. That was my plan. A good plan. A safe, sensible, peaceful plan. Drak had other ideas. Vorath, he said, appearing beside me with the specific energy of someone who had already made a decision and was now simply informing others of it. There is a human in booth 7. I blinked my upper eyes at him. And I have never seen a human up close. They are not rare, Drak. There are 11 billion of them. Yes, but none of them have ever been in a place where I can look at them. He said this, as though his personal proximity to a species was the determining factor in whether they existed. Come, I want to see what the noise is about. This was my first mistake. I went with it. Now, I need to explain something about humans for those who have not had the tremendous and extremely stressful experience of meeting one. The galactic community had been aware of humanity for roughly 30 standard years at this point. 30 years, that is a blink. That is nothing. Most species spend that long just writing the preliminary documents before agreeing to talk. Humans in 30 years had already negotiated 4 trade agreements, started 2 small wars, ended 3 larger ones, colonized 6 moons, and somehow gotten themselves represented on the Galactic Commerce Tribunal, which normally takes species 300 years minimum to join. The current theory among Gallen academics was that humans operated on a form of compressed time psychology. Where other species experienced urgency over centuries, humans experienced it over decades. Where other species found patience in years, humans found impatience in hours. They were, in the most polite possible academic language, absolutely unhinged in the most productive way imaginable. But that was theory. I had read the papers. I had not yet seen the reality. The human in booth 7 was called Tova. I learned her name later, but I am telling you now because it matters. Tova, small word, easy to say, impossible to forget once you have seen her in action. She looked at first glance unremarkable. This is, I have come to understand, a consistent and extremely unfair feature of humans. They are sized somewhere between Gallen juveniles and Veltharin adults. Bipedal, 2 arms, 2 eyes, built from materials that should not, by any reasonable biomechanical assessment, be capable of doing the things they do. Tova had brown skin and dark hair pulled back with something colorful and braided, and she was sitting in her booth eating what I later identified as something called noodle soup with an expression of profound contentment. Drak walked directly up to her booth. I followed, already composing my future apology. Human, Drak said. Tova looked up from her soup. She had the specific expression of someone who had been interrupted during their meal and was deciding how annoyed to be about it. Yeah, I have heard your kind is tough. We have our moments, she said, and went back to her soup. Drak, to his credit, recognized that this was not the reaction of someone sufficiently impressed by him. He adjusted his approach. He planted 2 of his hands on her table, leaned forward, and said, with great theatrical weight, I do not believe it. Tova took another spoonful of soup. Slowly, deliberately, the way a person takes a spoonful of soup when they want to communicate that the other person's entire presence is a minor inconvenience. Then she looked up at him with an expression so calm it should have scared him. It scared me, and I was not the one being looked at. All right, she said. That was it. Just all right. Drak straightened up. This was not going the way he wanted. He looked at me. I made a face that I hoped communicated, "Please stop, please, I beg you," with every one of my respiratory organs. He did not read this face correctly. He reached into his belt holster and pulled out his combat knife. Now, I want to be precise about this knife. It was a Velthari blade, which means it was not small, it was not decorative. It was the kind of knife that Velthari soldiers used in close combat drills, weighted for throwing, with an edge that could slice through composite hull paneling. Drak was good with it. I had seen him practice. He threw it with a particular flick of his third wrist that made it spin fast and land point first every single time. The booth around us had gone quiet. The other patrons, a mix of Gallen merchants, one Ovrathi trader with eyes the size of plates, and two Kessel travelers, who had clearly seen things in their lives and yet were now watching this with great attention, all stopped moving. Drak raised the knife. "Catch this," he said, and he threw it. He threw it. At her. At the human girl eating her noodle soup. I heard the sound of the knife leave his hand. I heard the spin of it through air. I was already calculating the medical emergency. I was already thinking about how to explain this to Commander Prexmal. I was already composing the incident report in my head. And then, Tova reached out with 2 fingers, pinched the blade between them mid-spin, and set it down on the table beside her soup bowl with a soft little click. She did not look up from her noodles. The booth was so quiet, I could hear the ventilation system 3 levels above us cycling through its filters. Drak made a sound. It was not a word. It was the kind of sound a being makes when reality has just done something that reality was not supposed to be able to do. Tova picked up her spoon again. She considered her bowl. She said, very quietly and very pleasantly, as though commenting on the weather on a mild afternoon, "The rotation on that was pretty good, actually. Left flick?" Drak stared at her. "What? Your throwing technique. Was that a left wrist flick?" "I'm just asking because the spin pattern was clockwise, which usually means left dominant throw." She looked up at him now, and there was no hostility in her face. None at all. Just the mild and genuine curiosity of someone who found the technical details interesting. "I used to do knife sports in school. Competition throwing. The wrist flick is everything, honestly." I watched Drak process this. I watched him understand that not only had she caught his combat knife between 2 fingers, she was now discussing the biomechanics of his throwing form with the energy of someone at a casual sports workshop. He sat down. He sat down at her booth without being invited, and he said, "You did that on purpose." "Well, I didn't do it by accident." She slid his knife back across the table to him. "You want some soup? This place has good broth." I sat down too. Honestly, what else was I going to do? Stand there? Tova, it turned out, was a cargo coordinator for a mid-range human freight company called Valen Transit. She had been at the Polaris 4 outpost for 6 days waiting on a delayed shipment of something called industrial polymer sheeting, which she described with exactly the same tone most beings would reserve for a national disaster. She had in those 6 days already learned 7 words of Gallen trade language, gotten into one argument with an Ovrathi dock manager about loading bay access, won that argument, made friends with the Kessel maintenance crew on level 4, and apparently perfected her noodle soup order. "How did you do that?" I asked, because I had to. The question was physically sitting in my chest, demanding to come out. "The knife. How?" She thought about it, genuinely thought about it, as though she were trying to find the right language. "Okay, so, humans have this thing called fast twitch muscle response. It's how we catch things. Like, when something's coming at you fast, your body there's this processing thing that happens before your brain catches up. You see the object, your hands move, and your brain gets the memo about half a second later." She paused. "Was that a test? Because if you're from a species that tests strangers by throwing knives at them, I need to update my outpost safety notes." "He is an idiot," I said, pointing at Drak. "I was testing," Drak said, with remarkable dignity for someone who had just had his intimidation technique turned into a conversation about technique. Tova seemed to find this answer entirely satisfactory. "Cool," she said. "What species are you? I know Gallen," she gestured at me, "but I haven't seen a 6-arm setup like yours before." "Velthari." "Nice. Do all Velthari throw knives at strangers, or is that a you thing?" "It is," I said firmly, "a him thing." Drak, to his credit, bought us all more soup. This was his version of an apology, and given that he was Velthari, it was practically a formal ceremony. We talked for an hour, maybe more. Tova had an attention for detail that was, I later understood, Standard issue for humans but alarming to encounter without warning. She asked questions like someone taking notes. She remembered every answer. She repeated things back slightly, rephrased, testing her understanding, correcting herself when she was wrong with the specific zero-ego approach that I had, before that day assumed was unique to advanced diplomatic training. But she was not a diplomat. She was a cargo coordinator. This was just how she operated. At some point she mentioned casually in between spoonfuls that she had a problem. The delayed shipment, she said. It's not just delayed. I think someone redirected it. I set down my drink. Redirected where? That's the thing. She looked at us both. Not worried. Not panicked. Something more focused than either of those things. Something that I was starting to recognize. Humans called determined. I don't know yet, but I have some ideas. Drak and I looked at each other across the table. We had been at the station for 2 hours. We had 2 hours left before we needed to be back on the unyielding dusk. We were, by any reasonable assessment, about to mind our own business and return to our ship and never speak of this afternoon again. Tell us the ideas, Drak said. I did not argue. I also wanted to hear the ideas. This, looking back, was the moment everything shifted. Not the knife, not the catching, not the soup. This moment where two beings who had absolutely no reason to get involved looked at a human and decided, yes, we are involved now, this is happening. I have talked to other species about this effect. It is not unique to us. There is something about humans when they decide they are going to do something that makes you want to watch, not just watch, help. You find yourself thinking, well, if anyone can figure this out, it is probably her, and if she is going to figure it out, I would like to be standing nearby when it happens. Scientists call this the human adjacent phenomenon. It has been documented in 14 separate first contact studies. No one fully understands it. The current best explanation is that humans operate at a frequency of confidence that other species instinctively find magnetic. My personal theory is simpler. When Tova looked at us, she was not asking for help because she was helpless. She was inviting us into something she was already going to do, with or without us. You could feel the difference. And the difference was everything. The polymer shipment, she said, pulling out a small data reader and setting it flat on the table, was logged at Dock 9 4 standard hours ago. Dock 9 is on the far side of the station. No public foot traffic. The dock manager, our friend with the loading bay access situation, logged it as rerouted due to a manifest error. What kind of manifest error? I asked. The kind that doesn't exist, she said. I wrote the manifest myself. There is no error. Drak leaned forward on 3 of his elbows. So someone changed the routing. Someone changed the routing, she confirmed, and the only person with access to modify a sealed manifest after submission is a senior dock authority. She looked at both of us, which means this goes higher than a dock manager with a grudge. The ventilation system hummed above us. Around the booth, the normal noise of the outpost continued, traders haggling, cargo loaders rumbling past, someone somewhere arguing about currency conversion. I thought about the 2 hours I had left before needing to return to the ship. I thought about the ceiling of a quiet booth and a peaceful afternoon. Where, I said slowly, is Dock 9? Tova smiled. It was the smile of someone who had already known what the answer was going to be before the question was finished. Level 7, she said. Sub-corridor 4. Want to see something interesting? Drak was already standing. I stood up too. Of course I did. Sub-corridor 4 on level 7 smelled like recycled coolant and old ambition, the kind of place that exists on every station in every system, built for function and then quietly forgotten by everyone except the people who needed to do things they did not want seen. The lights ran on a dimmer cycle down here, flickering every few seconds in a way that was either a maintenance issue or a very specific kind of atmosphere. Probably both. Tova walked like she had already memorized the floor plan. Not fast, not slow. The exact pace of someone who knew that running attracted attention and stopping attracted suspicion. I noticed this and filed it under the growing category in my head labeled, things about this human that should not be possible for someone who has been on this station for 6 days. Drak walked beside me, all 6 limbs moving with the practiced quiet of a soldier, which he technically was, even if his recent behavior had not reflected particularly well on that profession. How did you find this route? I asked Tova, keeping my voice low. I got lost on day 2, she said, took a wrong turn by the coolant exchange on level 6, and ended up wandering down here for about 40 minutes before I found a maintenance worker who pointed me back to the main corridors. She paused at a junction, looked left, looked right, turned left. I have a good memory for places I've been, even the ones I was not supposed to be in. That is a very specific skill. It's kept me employed, she said simply. Dock 9 came into view around a long curve in the corridor. It was bigger than I expected. Most freight docks at an outpost this size were functional boxes, just large enough for a standard cargo loader, and the equipment needed to move things. Dock 9 was 3 times that, with ceiling height that suggested whoever built it had plans for significant volume. Currently it was full. Crates, dozens of them, stacked in rows with the specific organized efficiency of someone who moved cargo professionally. They bore no immediate identifying marks from our distance, but Tova stopped walking the moment she saw them and went very still. Those are not polymer crates, she said. She was correct. Even from where we stood, the shape was wrong. Polymer sheeting shipped in flat rectangular containers, layered and strapped. These crates were cubic, heavy gauge by the look of the base mounts. The kind of crate used for equipment, or components, or things that needed shielding from scanner frequencies. How many shipments did you have? I asked. 1. 300 units of industrial polymer, contract number V774.1 for the Lithara Station construction project. She looked at me. What you are looking at is not that. Maybe they moved yours, and this is something else. Maybe, she said, but her voice said no. We needed to get closer, and we all knew it. Tova looked back at Drak, then at me, with the expression of someone running a quick probability calculation in their head. Okay, she said, here's what we know. Dock 9 is supposed to be logged as inactive. The manifest says my cargo was rerouted here for holding. Instead it is full of something unregistered, and the dock manager who has a problem with me is the one who filed the reroute. She looked at the dock. Someone is storing something they do not want scanned. That is an extremely common activity in sub-corridors, Drak noted helpfully. Yes, but my cargo is now missing, which makes it my problem. She rolled her neck, one of those human physical gestures I was still learning to read. I'm going in. That is a bad idea, I said. I know, she agreed, and walked forward. Drak looked at me. I looked at Drak. We followed her. This had already become the pattern of the afternoon, and I had accepted it somewhere between the soup and the sub-corridor. The dock entrance had a standard panel lock, the kind installed at every moderate security freight point across the station. Tova looked at it for about 4 seconds. Then she reached into the front pocket of her vest and produced a small flat tool that I did not recognize. She ran it across the panel, pressed 2 points simultaneously, and the door opened. I stared at her. Cargo coordinators have override access to any dock that holds an active contract under their company name, she said, without looking at me. V774E1 is technically still logged as routed here, so technically, this is my dock right now. That is either very clever or very illegal. Both, usually, she said, and stepped inside. The inside of Dock 9 was worse than the outside implied. The crates were packed tight enough to create narrow pathways between them, and the air had the particular stillness of a space that had been sealed for a while. No active loaders, no crew presence, no lighting except the emergency strips running along the base of the walls in dull orange. Tova moved to the nearest crate and examined the side panel. She pulled a small scanner from her belt, the kind of general-use unit that freight workers carried for inventory verification, and ran it over the surface. The scanner made a soft negative tone. Shielded, she said quietly. Internally lined. Whatever is in here, it is not supposed to be read. Drak crossed to a second crate and pressed the side of his face against it, in a gesture I recognized as a Velthari pressure listening technique. You could hear density and movement through certain materials if you knew how. He pulled back after a moment with an expression I had not seen on him before, something between recognition and unease. These have been at temperature, he said. Climate-controlled interior. Something in here needs to be kept at a specific condition. Biological? I asked. Possibly, he looked at Tova. Or chemical. Tova was already moving between the rows, not randomly, but in a systematic sweep, checking serial marks, examining base seals. She found what she was looking for in the third row, a crate that was different, slightly smaller, marked with a secondary label under the main one, partially peeled back, showing a fragment of a shipping origin code. She photographed it. Then she straightened up and looked at both of us with an expression that was calm in the specific way that very serious people are calm when they have just found the thing they did not want to find. This code is Kethavian, she said. Drak's posture changed. All 6 limbs shifted in that particular Velthari way that meant full attention. You are certain? I know Kethavian shipping codes. We had a contract with a Kethavian supplier 2 years ago. They use a specific 8-digit prefix. She showed us the fragment. That's the prefix. I did not say anything for a moment. Kethavian operations at a Polaris 4 outpost were not on their own illegal. The Kethavian systems had open trade status, but Kethavian shielded cargo at an unregistered dock, rerouted under a falsified manifest, in a sub-corridor that was supposed to be inactive, was a very different sentence. We should leave, I said. Right now we should leave, and you should file a report with station authority, and we should not be here when whoever owns these crates comes back. I agree with that plan, Tova said. After I get one more thing. There should not be a one more thing. There is a one more thing. She was already moving toward the far end of the dock, where a small secondary office unit was built into the wall. Standard freight management, a desk terminal, a filing cabinet, a rack of physical documentation sleeves. The door was unlocked, which was either careless or a trap, and Tova pushed it open and went inside before I could finish the thought. I went in after her. Drak stayed at the dock entrance watching the corridor, which was the most strategically sensible decision any of us had made in the past hour. The office terminal was active. That was wrong. A supposedly inactive dock should not have an active terminal. Tova sat down at it without touching the keyboard, just looking at what was already on the screen, and I watched her face go through several expressions very quickly. There is a secondary manifest on this terminal, she said. What does it list? Components, she read quickly. Drive regulators, power cell arrays, navigation bypass kits. She stopped. Vorath. Yes, these are ship components. Military-class ship components. She turned to look at me. Someone is running an off-record parts supply through this outpost, bypassing the arms registry. Someone is outfitting ships that are not supposed to be outfitted. The lights in the corridor outside flickered and then came back on steady. Drak appeared in the doorway with the expression of someone who had very bad news and was deciding how to say it efficiently. We have company, he said. 4 of them, coming from the main junction. Tova closed the terminal screen, stood up, and looked at me. How fast can you run? Faster than you, almost certainly. Great, she said. Don't. What? Don't run faster than me. Keep pace. If we split up in these corridors, I don't know where I'm going and neither do you. This was, I realized, entirely correct. I had followed her here based entirely on her spatial memory of a place she had been lost in 4 days ago. Without her, Drak and I were 2 beings in a sub-corridor maze on a station we had been on for less than 3 hours. Understood, I said. We moved. Tova led. Not running, not yet, but the kind of fast walking that was indistinguishable from running to anyone watching casually. She took a right at the office, not back the way we came, and I trusted this because at this point trusting her spatial judgment was the only option I had. Behind us, I heard voices, not yet alarmed but moving with purpose. They were coming into the dock. They would see the open terminal screen in the office in approximately 12 seconds. Left here, Tova said. We went left. A maintenance access corridor, narrower, pipes running along the ceiling, the smell of processed air and insulation. Right. We went right. Up. There was a ladder, a physical ladder, bolted to the wall leading to a maintenance hatch in the ceiling. Tova went up it with a speed that I want to state clearly was not normal. She climbed a ladder the way gravity was an administrative suggestion rather than a physical law. Drak and I followed, and I heard the voices behind us shift from purposeful to alarmed. They had found the open terminal. The hatch opened into a crawl space above level 7, running between the ceiling of the sub-corridor and the floor of level 6. Tova was already moving through it on hands and knees, fast and confident, and I followed in a crawl that was deeply undignified for a Gallen officer of my standing. There is a second hatch about 40 meters ahead, she said, not even slightly out of breath, which was, I want to note, unfair. It comes out in the level 6 maintenance bay. From there we can get to the public corridors. You know this how? I managed, around the effort of crawling. I was lost for 40 minutes on day 2, she said. I told you, I remember places. 40 meters of crawl space. Below us I could hear them moving, searching, the sound of boots on the corridor floor. They were organized, moving in a pattern, not random. These were people who knew how to search a space. Tova reached the second hatch, pushed it open, and dropped through. I followed. Drak came last, folding himself through the opening with the specific flexibility of Velthari anatomy. The level 6 maintenance bay was empty. Tova led us across it, through a side door, and out into a public service corridor. Around us, normal station traffic continued. A Gallen maintenance worker pushing a cart, 2 Kessel travelers arguing about something involving a hand terminal. The ordinary noise of a busy outpost on an ordinary afternoon. We walked, casually, back toward the main commercial level. Nobody said anything for a full minute. Then Drak said, "That was good." "Yeah," Tova agreed. "The latter part especially. I do a lot of cargo work on ships with non-standard layouts," she said. "You get used to climbing." I stopped walking. They both stopped and looked at me. I needed a moment to process the afternoon, the knife, the fingers, the soup, the corridor, the crates, the ladder, all of it. "What," I said very carefully, "are you going to do with what you found?" Tova looked at me with those very calm, very focused human eyes. "I'm going to file a formal complaint with station authority about my missing shipment. In the complaint I'm going to include my scanner logs from Dock 9, the photograph of the Kethavian origin code, and a time-stamped record of the active terminal in the office." She paused. "I'm going to do this in the next 20 minutes, before whoever owns those crates figures out what I photographed and decides to do something about it." "And your polymer shipment?" "Honestly, at this point I think it's on a different station entirely," she said. "But that's a problem for after the authority report. First things first." Drak looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of someone who had expected a quiet afternoon and had instead watched reality turn sideways and somehow come out more interesting than it went in. We walked over to the station authority office on level 3. We stood outside while she went in. We waited. 11 minutes later she came back out with a case reference number, an authority officer's contact credentials, and the expression of someone who had just successfully completed a task they had started. "Done," she said. "That's it?" Drak asked. "That's the first part. Now I need to call my company's legal coordinator and tell her to prepare for a potential cargo dispute claim." She checked her data reader. "Then I'm going to find somewhere to eat dinner, because I didn't finish my lunch." We had 40 minutes before we needed to be back on the unyielding dusk. I calculated this. Then I looked at Drak. He was already looking back at me with the expression that meant he had calculated the same thing. "We know a place with decent noodles," I said. Tova smiled. The specific smile of someone who had had a very full afternoon and was not even slightly done with the day. "Lead the way." We ate. She told us about the Lothara construction project, the company she worked for, 3 other stations she had passed through in the past year. She asked about Gallen culture with the attentive precision that I was now starting to understand was simply how she operated with everyone. Drak told her about Velthari clan structures, and she asked 14 follow-up questions and remembered every answer. When we had to leave, she walked us to the dock where the unyielding dusk was birthed. She shook Drak's primary hand. She shook my secondary hand. She looked up at the ship with the expression humans get when they see something they find impressive but are not going to say so out loud. "Good ship," she said. "Thank you," I said, because I felt responsible for it somehow, which made no logical sense. "Hey," she said, as we were moving toward the boarding ramp. We both turned. She was looking at Drak with a small, very genuine expression. "Left wrist flick. You should try it with a slightly looser grip on release. You'll get better rotation." Drak stared at her for a full second. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, turned and walked back toward the station interior, not looking back, already moving on to whatever was next. We boarded the ship. We filed back to our stations. Commander Prexmol asked if anything notable had happened during the free period, and Drak and I both said no at exactly the same time, which made the commander look at us for a very long moment before deciding she did not want to know. That night, in my bunk I wrote 3 pages of notes, about the knife, about the fingers, about the corridor, and the crates, and the ladder, and the way Tova moved through every situation with the specific, infuriating, magnificent calm of someone who had decided that problems were just things that happened before solutions. I titled the notes, Human Adjacent Phenomenon, Personal Observation Polaris 4. At the bottom I wrote one final line. They threw us into the galaxy 30 years ago like a stone into still water, and we are still watching the rings spread. I do not know where Tova is now. Her shipment was recovered, I found out later, from a redirected holding point at a station 3 systems over. The Dock 9 operation was flagged for full investigation by Polaris 4th Station Authority. The Kethavian connection was reportedly significant enough to involve 3 different enforcement agencies. She probably moved on to the next contract, the next manifest, the next corridor she was not supposed to be in. I hope somewhere out there, she is eating good soup, and I hope for the sake of whoever is in the booth next to her, that they do not try to impress her with a knife, because she will catch it. And then she will ask you about your technique, and somehow that will be worse.